Mr. Brock, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. I have much to say, but I want to start by offering my sincerest apologies to Mr. Laporte, Mr. Mills, Mr. Albert, and Madame Poulin for this shameless display of a cover-up between the Liberal government and the NDP coalition partners. Because we're all here to do a job. You all have jobs to do when you get back to your respective offices. We are taking you away from your respective offices and the good work that you do day in and day out. And it's no different with politicians. As parliamentarians, we're parliamentarians all year long. We're not parliamentarians when the House is sitting. We don't take a 3 to 4 month break and not worry about our responsibilities to the government, to Canada, to address ongoing issues that are a prevalent concern in Canada. And that is the issue with respect to the fraudulent billing and the broken procurement system that we have in this country that has allowed fraudsters and grifters to take advantage of a broken system that didn't provide the appropriate oversight. And the Liberal government and the members of this Liberal committee with their NDP partners don't want to get to the truth. When I say we're parliamentarians for the entire year, that's exactly it. As Michael Barrett articulated, my colleague, members of my community in Brantford-Brant, my constituency, know that I have to work year-round. I have to work from time to time in Ottawa and for extended periods of time in Ottawa, in addition to my responsibilities to my community. In essence, parliamentarians can walk and chew gum at the same time. And as my colleague indicated, 90% of the Liberal members of this committee and the NDP member are not here physically in Ottawa. They're taking advantage of what Parliament has allowed in terms of a hybrid format to do just that, walk and chew gum at the same time. Take meetings before, take meetings after. I too had an extremely busy day today, a very busy day tomorrow, but you know what? We all have incredible staffs. We can reschedule meetings. And when I tell my constituents, I'm here fighting for you and to be your voice, to ask the tough questions, they want me to do my job. They don't want to see me flipping hamburgers, stuffing a hot dog, handing out balloons and other trinkets to children. They expect me to do my job as a parliamentarian. When I have the ability to spend time in my constituency, I do that, all the while balancing a family life. I'm the proud parent of 2 twin daughters. At 15 years of age, I can tell you that's quite challenging.
That's why you have no hair.
That's right. That's why I have no hair, according to the chair. But it really angers me because, and you witnesses have been, this isn't your first rodeo. You've all been either party to or have heard how many of your colleagues across a number of departments have prepped, have prepared, have attended in person, even though you got the ability to appear hybrid as well, but to attend in person, and after giving your opening statements, working hard on your opening statements, getting one round in from the Conservatives, only to be met with gamemanship by the Liberal bench, supported by their NDP colleagues. For me, it has happened at least a dozen times since January the 1st. And in my view, it is so disrespectful to you as professionals. So that's why I offer my sincerest apology. But should we be surprised? Because where there's controversy, there is risk. The government clearly knows they're not currying any favor with Canadians. Depending on the poll, they're at least 20 points down. A leader who refuses to smell the coffee and realize he is the most disliked prime minister in the history of this country, completely tone deaf to the reality, tone deaf to his own caucus, who quietly and quite often publicly voice their displeasure with his leadership. So they will take cues from a failed leader as a prime minister. They'll take cues from a prime minister's office who loves to control and to mitigate the damage. We've been exposing the damage of this issue every single week at government operations. That's the mandate of government operations, to take a look at problems, to identify those problems, to get the full picture, and to look for solutions so that the problem can be resolved in the future. If these members view that to be political or acting as a prosecutor, as Mr. Sousa has often indicated from time to time, or being too prosecutorial, Mr. Brock, you've given up your former career as a Crown prosecutor. You're a parliamentarian now. It's time to be nice. Throw the softball questions to witnesses. That's not our job. Our job is to ask the tough questions, get the answers that Canadians are asking. So when we talk about political gamemanship, this is exactly what happened today. Because there is a lot of problems with this issue that needs to be explored. We all remember the famous slogan that Justin Trudeau used in 2015, "Sunny ways, Canadians, sunny ways." He even then wrote an open letter to Canadians, and I'm going to read various passages of that letter. It was dated November the 4th, 2015, starts off, "My dear friends."
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
And there's a point of order.
Excuse me, Mr. Brock. Yes, Mr. Jory.
First of all, I want to thank you for the latitude that you've shown on the spectrum of the conversation that we're having, and also thanks to all my colleagues for the patience. But I'm not sure, and Canadian now can see exactly why we call it this meeting a politicization than anything else.
Or what's the point
Having
of order,
said that,
please,
I'm looking for
sorry.
relevance of referring to by-elections and referring to, it's all
Okay,
about to the fact that the motion that we are debating.
Thanks.
So what's the relevance?
I do find it relevant, but we always do offer very, very wide berth for such debate, and it is, the motion put forward allows, because it's not very specific, allows an extremely wide area to debate. Continue, Mr. Brock.
So partway through this open letter to Canadians, the Prime Minister says, "Our country faces many real and immediate challenges, from a struggling middle class to the threat of climate change. If we are to overcome these obstacles, Canadians need to have faith in their government's honesty and willingness to listen." Emphasis mine. "That is why we committed to set a higher bar for openness and transparency in Ottawa. Government and its information must be open by default. Simply put, It is time to shine more light on government to make sure it remains focused on the people it was created to serve, you. But in order for you to trust your government, you need a government that will trust you. When we make a mistake, as all governments do, it is important that we acknowledge that mistake and learn from it. We know that you do not expect us to be perfect, but you expect us to work tirelessly and to be honest, open, and sincere in our efforts to serve the public interest. Before the election, we also made a commitment to bring new leadership and a new tone to Ottawa. Moving forward, we will pursue our goals and objectives with a renewed sense of collaboration. We fully understand and appreciate that partnerships with provincial, territorial, and municipal governments are vital to deliver the real positive change that we promised you. To close, I am deeply grateful to have this opportunity to serve you and every Canadian across our great country. I am committed to leading an open, honest government that is accountable to Canadians. Repeat, accountable to Canadians. Lives up to the highest ethical standards. Brings our country together and applies the utmost care and prudence in the handling of public funds. Thank you for having faith in me. Thank you for putting your trust in our team. We will not let you down. What an absolute joke. An absolute lie. We're talking about fraud in this committee. In my respectful opinion, the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau committed the biggest fraud on this country and Canadians. Everything that I read out in the record, he has done the complete opposite. Just that last line, to apply the utmost care and prudence in the handling of public funds. Would we be in the mess we are right now? Would we have the amount of public debt that we have now if he actually for 1 minute had respect for $1 of taxpayer money? Would we be spending over $21 billion on outside consultants and contractors with no oversight? Would we be in the situation where we've expanded our federal public service by 40%, increasing salaries substantially? Have Canadians looked at their level of service across this country and say, wow, I've received 40% more in value of services? I think if all four of you and Canadians who are watching this right now on my social media were to contact my staff in my constituency office, who spend all day long either on hold with various departments or dealing with issues that should be handled by our professional public service. They have very little time to do anything else other than government work. And I'm sure I am not alone in that assessment. I'm sure this is not just a conservative issue. I'm sure my Bloc friend, colleague, Madame Vignola, would probably concur with me, because I've been talking to various MPs from across this country. who are facing the very same thing. And I'm sure every constituency of the Liberal bench and the NDP member who is appearing virtually also has similar stories, because that's what's happening. We are not getting value for our tax dollars. And I hear that daily from constituents. I hear that daily from Canadians from coast to coast to coast on my social media. They applaud me daily at my diligence in asking the tough questions. I often said, you know, you can take the prosecutor out of the courtroom, but you can't take the prosecutor out of the politician. It's a strategy. It is a method that I've honed and developed for 30 years. And I know that when I ask a question, based on that response, there might be another 10 questions I'm going to have to ask. Because it's like peeling that proverbial onion. And I know that various journalists from across this country have remarked, in my view, very correctly, that the rot in this government that this committee and other committees are exposing is just the tip of the iceberg. And we have a mandate as parliamentarians, we have a mandate as proud members of the mighty OGO to ask those tough questions. So this is not political gamemanship, as Mr. Juwari has remarked on a number of occasions. It's not acting as a prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner, as Mr. Sousa often remarks. It's asking the questions that Canadians have been asking us. And I can only speak for myself and my Conservative colleagues, and I dare say I will probably speak for Ms. Vanyola. We take our responsibility as parliamentarians extremely seriously. And our role is to listen, to advocate, and to seek solution. Government bench, Liberal bench, they don't want nothing to do with it. I made the time to be here, as did other members who are physically appearing here. Mr. Juwari, I had great faith. I saw Mr. Juwari when I walked into this room. I said, great. We actually may complete a 2-hour meeting here in the summer. But how disappointing to hear the moment that he got the floor that he wanted to shut this down and prevent any further summer meetings. So just like Mr. Barrett, I wanted to ask some very relevant, pertinent questions that I think Canadians wanted to hear me ask, and Canadians wanted to hear from you officials as to your thoughts on this. And I know Mr. Barrett, my colleague, mentioned whether or not there was a fear from the Liberal members on this bench that some of the questions we'd be putting to you would expose political bias. And I'm going to give you an example of what I feel they wanted to shut down. But the nice thing about this is I've got the floor, and Mr. Juwari and all the Liberal members on this committee and Mr. Julian can't shut me down because there is relevance to what I'm about to put to you. Now, there's a company called Think Digital. I don't know if all 4 of you are familiar with that. I'm not expecting an answer, of course. Think Digital is a consulting and coaching firm. Think Digital has received nearly $400,000 in government contracts over the past 2 years. Nearly half of the contracts they have received were sole sourced. 2 contracts were awarded by PSPC. I'm going to leave aside the discussion of sole sourcing because that literally could take on a life of its own. We know that there are rules that allow sole sourcing, but we also know through various reports from the AG and the procurement ombud that there were serious violations of those rules to allow liberal-friendly consultants and contractors to receive government funds. Classic example of that, GC Strategies. Now, maybe this is what they didn't want you to answer. There are Liberal Party of Canada links to Think Digital. Surprise, surprise. The CEO of that company, Ryan Androsoff, is a Liberal Party activist and donor to the Liberal Party of Canada. A consultant of Think Digital, Winter Fedak, made 78 donations to the Liberal Party of Canada and was the Liberal candidate in Regina Leuven in 2019. She is listed as a 2023 mentor on the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation website. Trudeau Minister Terry Beach appeared on the consulting firm's podcast just 3 months ago. Now, on the surface, red flags galore. You don't have to be a Conservative opposition MP. And for the Canadians who are watching this, the big question, what the hell is going on? Do you have to have Liberal ties to secure hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money? Well, on the surface, it certainly sounds that way, doesn't it? So the question I would be putting to PSPC is as follows. Is there a process? Does the government vet and screen for Liberal Party links before handing out $400,000 in taxpayer money? It doesn't. If it doesn't raise any alarm, does it raise any alarm bells or the red flags, as I reference, that the CEO is a Liberal activist? Does it raise any alarm bells that one of the current employees ran for the Liberal Party and made donations? We already know about the Liberal-friendly linked firm like McKinsey receiving over $200 million since Justin Trudeau took office. Has Minister Duclos asked for a review of firms receiving government contracts that have direct ties to the Liberal Party of Canada? If you responded, I'm not aware, or no, I would be asking you, would you be willing to commit to undertaking such a review? But I guess the big question that's on the minds of myself and Mr. Barrett, I'm sure Ms. Vignola, and Canadians, what value did Canadians receive in these contracts? We have 2 million Canadians using a food bank every month. I attended my own local food bank not too long ago. I was shocked to hear about the statistics of the number of people in my community using food banks. And surprisingly, people who are using out of necessity were the very same individuals who once donated. When food prices were under control, when we didn't have runaway inflation, when we didn't have the punitive carbon tax that is making life so unaffordable for everyone in my community and communities across this country. This is the unfortunate legacy of Justin Trudeau's Liberal government. Rent prices out of control, bank economists warning about mortgage defaults coming, tent cities right across Canada. How did that $400,000 to a Liberal-friendly company contracts, half of which were sole sourced. A Liberal candidate, a failed Liberal candidate, who then gets rewarded at the taxpayer's expense. How is that delivering value as per Justin Trudeau's promise in 2015? He lied. He lied repeatedly over the last 9 years as to how he is delivering for Canadians. And it's a mockery. It's a mockery on the intelligence of Canadians who now see through this government's jargon and bullet points and talking points and appearances in front of cameras. You know, we often say this government gets an A in announcements, big flashy announcements, all kinds of constituents or Canadians behind them, but an F for follow-up, an F for delivering. We got issues with the $10 a day daycare program, significant issues, benefiting all Canadians, coast to coast to coast. Tell that to families in my community who are on wait lists. Tell that to families in the county of my constituency who don't have access to transportation to take one of those $10 daycare spots. Let's talk about the problems with the dental care program. You know, every time we bring up the reality of what Canadians are facing day after day after day, what do we hear from the government? Take, for example, our Deputy Prime Minister, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. But Canada has a AAA credit rating. Well, you tell that to the single mother in my riding who is deciding to go without feeding herself to ensure that she puts food on the table for her children, who goes to Goodwill or Salvation Army, and through the generosity of other neighbors, she picks up some used clothing, but she's able to buy clothing barely for her children. Do you think when she's struggling at the cashier, we all know spending $100 on groceries today might net you 1 to 2 bags, most likely 1 bag? Do you think when she's struggling to pay for those groceries, she's got Chrystia Freeland ringing in her ears? But I should be proud that as a nation, we have a AAA credit rating. It's tone deaf. And we've been raising these issues with the government every single day in the House. And when we're not sitting in the House, we are raising those issues on our social media channels. The government refused to listen. Now, the Liberal bench and the NDP bench say we've never had it so good. We have never had it so good as a nation. Trust us. Well, you know what? I have been in Mr. Sousa's riding. I have been in Mr. Juari's riding. I have not been in Mr. McDonald's riding, but I look forward to that opportunity. But I've been in Windsor as well. And I've talked to those constituents, and they are not immune. They're not living in silos because they have a Liberal member. They are feeling and facing the same dire economic consequences of this failed Liberal NDP government. That's the reality. And those members should be listening to those voices. It's no wonder that all the members of this Liberal bench are facing the prospect of losing in the next election. Because this is the reality. This is the failed government that they defend day after day after day, and are doing it today in this shameless example of partisanship. Now, Justin Trudeau talked about, in that letter to Canadians, he talked about having the most ethical government, perhaps the most ethical government this country has ever seen. Not only, as my colleague Mr. Barrett has articulated, not only does he have the legacy and distinction of being the only prime minister to have accumulated more debt than any other prime minister of this great nation combined. Not only that, he is the first prime minister. He is the first prime minister to have been found guilty. Let that sink in. To have been found guilty of ethical violations. First one being the Aga Khan vacation, the Christmas vacation, where he claims, I thought I was complying with the ethic rules. Clearly, he didn't read the legislation, or his handlers. We know that the Prime Minister doesn't like to read. That's been quite evident. He gets read to by his handlers. So perhaps the handlers didn't take the time to properly inform him that there was obviously some ethical issues with accepting that vacation. But what stands out in my mind, and this was before my career as a parliamentarian, I've always been a political junkie all my life. I follow it religiously. I could be involved in the most complicated and protracted homicide trial as a prosecutor. I'd always find time to watch the news, to keep up on what's happening in Ottawa. And I remember when the story broke by the Globe and Mail about the interference in the SNC-Lavalin issue. And the Prime Minister looked Canadians in the eye by staring at the reporter's camera and said that the story that broke that morning in the Globe and Mail was false, that he took no steps to interfere in the decision-making of Canada's first Indigenous Attorney General and Minister of Justice. See, the Prime Minister has a penchant for lying. He's a very good liar. And that's a classic example of a lie. He was cornered, he was caught, he doubled down, stared Canadians in the eye, and said, I didn't interfere. Ethics Commissioner saw it otherwise. Ethics Commissioner interviewed everyone literally that touched that particular file and found, in summary, a protracted interference activity, not only by the Prime Minister, but various ministers, the Prime Minister's office itself, Katie Telford and Gerald Butts, two of his prized handlers. Chief of Staff right now, Katie Telford, Mr. Butts off in New York City. But what was revealed in the report, the Trudeau 2 report that I read from Commissioner Dion, extremely troubling as a former officer of the court. They're on record as communicated by former Privy Council Michael Warnock. They confirmed they didn't want to hear about the law. They didn't want to hear about legalities. Just get the deal done. Give SNC that deferred prosecution agreement. Here we have the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff disregard the laws of Canada, disregard the Criminal Code of Canada, and get the deal done. That is disgusting. It is appalling. And that's why I am just so vigorously entrenched in this whole concept that a national police service, the RCMP, needs to revisit this SNC investigation issue, because there is a lot more evidence that they need to consider. So, getting back to the ethical standards, it's no wonder when you got the Prime Minister who so easily breaches our ethical standards, that he sets an example, for his entire government. It's no small wonder that various ministers, various MPs, including backbench MPs, have followed suit and have been found guilty of ethical violations. You know, there was a point in time with our Canadian governments, there was a concept of one and done. You commit an ethical violation, you've been found guilty. Even suspicion of an ethical violation could result in a member's ouster or resignation. But who has resigned in the Liberal government after having been found guilty of ethical violations? Zero. Because there's no accountability. So when he says in his open letter to Canadians, we're going to make mistakes, we need to apologize to Canadians and do better. Have you heard any heartfelt apologies from the Prime Minister or anyone from the Liberal government? No. They've created a culture of incompetence, and Canadians are fed up. They were sold a wrong bill of goods. Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper tried to warn us. And every one of his predictions about what Justin Trudeau was really about has all come true. We didn't listen, or I did, but the majority of Canadians in 2015 did not. And here we find ourselves in that situation. So that was a line of questioning that I wanted to bring to your attention. I had other, before I move off on Think Digital, I've actually researched on Open Canada the contracts that were provided to Think Digital. And one thing that really concerns me, and this was a contract value dated December 13th, 2023, for a value of just over $70,000. The work description, tuition fees, and costs of attending courses, including seminars. So is the Government of Canada now in the business of providing free tuition and costs to a Liberal-friendly company? Certainly appears that way, doesn't it? $70,000. And that wasn't a one-off. I found another example. $12,870, March 2nd, 2022. Fees and costs of attending seminars and workshops. So the government has retained Think Digital, has given them the authority to attend various seminars and workshops to gain greater knowledge and skills at the taxpayer expense. What about all the other consultants out there in Canada that are playing by the rules? Maybe they're not contributing to the Liberal Party of Canada. They're not making donations. They're going to have to probably fund those courses and that tuition on their own. But when you are a failed Liberal candidate, there's a little bit of loyalty that the government will extend to you. So what type of message does that send to Canadians? You're not a prime minister for all. You're not looking out for the best interests of Canadians. You're looking out for the best interests of Liberal supporters. You financially contribute to the Liberal Party of Canada, wink, nudge, you're going to get your just desserts. You're going to get your benefits. We'll find a way to get it done. Sorry you didn't win the election, but we'll benefit you. Just stay in touch. That's the message Justin Trudeau wants to send to his cronies. And that's what this committee wants to examine. This is what this committee needs to examine. This is what this committee, Canadians, demand to be examined. Another thing, another area that I wanted to get into is the constituents I speak with and the constituents, or Canadians, I should say, from across the country who respond to my social media are very grateful for the work I'm doing and my colleagues in exposing the rot in this government. And they're saying, good job, keep at it, keep digging, keep peeling that onion. But when are we going to get our money back? Okay, when are we going to get our money back? So one of the questions I would be putting to you, Mr. Mills, I just need a moment to find it, is when Minister Duclos, your minister, with the president of the Treasury Board, Anita Anand, made the announcement in March of 2024 about the 3 cases of suspected fraud that went to the RCMP, where there was an estimation of $5 million in fraudulent overbilling or activities. Minister is on record saying that day that his department has revoked or suspended the security clearances of the contractors, and, this is the emphasis, and is taking action to recover the money. That was 4 months ago. There have been no announcements by Minister Duclos or the Prime Minister or anyone in government about the efforts to collect that money. And this is what I'm hearing daily from Canadians. This is our money that was illegally given to these fraudsters and grifters. We want it back. Just think globally. If there was an appetite by this failed, tired government to actually recoup those losses, what it could do to our national debt. But I have concerns. We hear from the Canada Revenue Agency that despite its ballooning staff force, they don't have the means. They don't have the means to collect even the overbilling for the COVID payments. That they're writing off tens of millions of dollars in cases where taxpayer money was wrongly sent to Canadians. We've heard the horror stories of just how fast and furious money was being distributed by this government. No scrutiny, no channels of investigation. You put the claim in, we're going to trust you, we're going to accept it at face value. We don't care if you're in prison, we'll get it to you. We don't care if you've deceased, we'll give it to you. We don't care if you live outside of Canada, we'll give it to you. And now after the coast is clear and the dust has settled, and we take a look at the millions, tens of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars, that was wrongly sent to individuals, well, we don't have the staff. We don't have the proper mechanisms to recover. That's not good enough. You know, we're a G7 country. My God, we are a first world country. find the tools to get the job done and recover Canadians' money. That's what they expect. I was going to bring to your attention an opposition motion brought by the Conservatives, supported by the Bloc, supported by the NDP, I believe supported by Independents and the Greens. It was an Opposition Day motion heard February 27, 2024. This is regarding the ArriveCan issue. The vote that passed was the next day, February 28th. And the last aspect of that motion, I'll read into the record. To call on the government to collect and recoup all funds paid to ArriveCan contractors and subcontractors which did no work on the ArriveCan app within 100 days of the motion being adopted, and for the Prime Minister to table a report in the House demonstrating that taxpayer funds have been repaid. This was the will of Canadian Parliament, voted on in favor by every opposition member, except the government, of course. 100 days from February the 28th would have been June the 6th, that passed over a month ago. From June the 6th to today's date, 46 days have passed. And what have parliamentarians heard, and what have Canadians heard? Nothing but crickets. So, the obvious question to your department: has the minister given you direction? Has the minister adopted a regime to recoup the tens of millions of dollars given to Government of Canada Strategies, also known as GC Strategies, and its grifter Christian Firth? What have you done? Is it in process? Has the government recouped anything to tell Canadians we are the stewards that we said we would be for the taxpayer? That's just one example. I personally, I know Mr. Barrett and Ms. Block, we really wanted to dive deep into the number of cases that have been referred to the RCMP. The RCMP, and I understand this from my past background, wanted to attend committee and provide as much information as they could. The end result was we didn't learn a lot because they're in the middle of investigations and they wanted to preserve the integrity. I get that from a legal perspective. I don't get that from a parliamentarian perspective. And that's why I kept asking the questions. Can you give us a sense, Commissioner? Can you give us a sense as to how many cases of potential criminal activity, largely fraud related, is the RCMP currently investigating? Couldn't give me a number, but I asked the question, is it more than 6? And I believe it was the Deputy Commissioner who confirmed, yes, it was more than 6. Now we know, because Minister Duclos and Minister Anand confirmed, 3 of those cases went to the RCMP. We now know, and it was confirmed in your responses to my colleague, Mr. Barrett, that we have another individual who defrauded the taxpayer for $250,000. So that's 4. The question I put to Minister Duclos when he last attended, I believe it was OGO, left a very sour taste in my mouth. I don't know if he consulted with anyone here, but I was going to ask you, was there any, in fact, there may have been some of you seated beside him when he testified. He confirmed very proudly, as did Minister Anand in March, that this was simply the first wave, that other waves would be announced in the very near future, But he went further. He said back in March that there were 10 to 15 other cases of suspected fraud that had the potential of being referred to the RCMP. His words, not mine. So when he attended recently, I believe it was in June, early June, I followed up on that. It wasn't a got you question. There wasn't no malice behind it. I was being inquisitory. Of the 10 to 15, Minister, that you announced in March, how many of those did you or your department refer to the RCMP? Simple, straightforward, basic question. But of course, in usual fashion from Minister Duclos, I get word salad. Wouldn't answer the question. I asked it again. Wouldn't answer the question. I asked it a third time. Wouldn't answer the question. I asked it a fourth time. Wouldn't answer the question. I gave up after my 5th attempt. Why is it so difficult for you to give me a number? If it's 0, tell me it's 0. Are you still considering? Tell me you're considering. If you referred, tell me what you referred. I'm not asking for specifics. I'm not asking for names. I'm not asking for dollar value. You told Canadians 10 to 15 were being investigated in the second wave. So naturally, Mr. Mills, that would be the question I would put to you. You know, I was very disappointed in your minister for his absolute refusal to answer a basic question, but I think it's a relevant and important question that Canadians need to know. So maybe we'll have the opportunity at some point in the near future to ask these questions, and I'm glad and I'm seeing that all 4 of you are taking notes so that when we do meet again, perhaps you're going to have answers for us. You're going to be prepared to give us responses. Maybe there's details that you can't provide to us for confidentiality reasons. I don't know. But at least you've been forewarned and you've got a glimpse into the type of questions we would be asking. So in addition to that, I would be asking
Mr. Brock,
you.
I
Yes.
apologize. It's 1 o'clock. We are out of resources. We only booked to 1, so I am adjourning at this time. Sorry.